Previously, we saw Jacob, who worked 7 years to get Rachel his wife, but was denied her and received her older sister as a substitution. Then he was able to negotiate and was able to marry Rachel as well, under the guise of having to work another 7 years. Many children were born unto Leah, but none were born to Rachel, and this is where we are today in Genesis 30 and 1. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I will die." You can hear the frustration in Rachel's voice as she's speaking here, in that she doesn't have the kids that she desires, and she's kind of getting on Jacob's case, but I'm pretty sure Jacob is doing his part, so to speak. Genesis 30 and 2. And Jacob became very angry with Rachel, and he said, "Am I in God's stead, who has denied you children?" I wonder if this is one of those situations where Jacob has heard this line from Rachel multiple times. Because you think about it, Leah had, was it 4 kids at this point in time, right? So that doesn't just happen. I mean, there's probably quite a few years that have taken place that she had all these kids, and every time it was like, "Oh, when do I get mine, Jacob?" You know, and he's just kind of being put on the spot there, and he's done the same thing with one that he did with the other one, and he kind of knows the routine. And it's not like he's holding anything back, that he is in control of this, and this is just kind of him snapping, right? That, you know, he's not God. He doesn't have total control over life. Genesis 30 and 3. And she said, "See here, take my maid, Bilhah, and have intercourse with her. And when the baby comes, she will deliver it upon my knees, that I by her may have children." So she's proposing to use a form of surrogacy to have a child due to her inability to carry one herself. And she's going to get her maid to be the substitution. It wasn't that long ago we saw something very similar with Sarah, Isaac's dad, or Jacob's grandpa. And with regards to Sarah unable to have kids, so we had Hagar, who was her maid, and then we had the birth of Ishmael. So something similar going on. Genesis 30 and 4. And she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a secondary wife, and Jacob had intercourse with her. 30 and 5. And Bilhah became pregnant and bore Jacob a son. So it was not his technique that was faulty, it was Rachel. Because her womb was closed by God, as we saw in a previous chapter. It was closed because he displeased God when he didn't love Leah, his first wife. Genesis 30 and 6. And Rachel said, "God has judged and vindicated me, and has heard my plea, and has given me a son." So she named him Dan, meaning judged. Well, this is wonderful. Now she has her surrogate son. But is this the end? Genesis 30 and 7. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Well, there we go. Now she's got 2. She's catching up to her sister through surrogacy. Genesis 30 and 8. And Rachel said, with mighty wrestling and prayer to God, "I have struggled with my sister and have prevailed." So she named him, the second son of Bilhah bore, Naphtali, meaning struggled. I'm sure Rachel was quite depressed and quite distraught not having kids, and these 2 children born by surrogacy through Bilhah probably brought life back to her eyes again, that she felt as if she has been delivered for having these kids. Yes, it's not the ideal mechanism of childbirth, but it was a way for her to have sons nonetheless, and it was quite the struggle. Genesis 30 and 9. When Leah saw that she had ceased to bear, she gave Zilpah, her maid, to Jacob as a secondary wife. So here we go. Leah is going to do the exact same thing that her younger sister Rachel did, and give her maid over to her husband, Zilpah, the maid. Genesis 30 and 10. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Jacob a son. 30 and 11. Then Leah said, victory and good fortune have come. And she named him Gad, meaning fortune. So this would have happened in that time frame after she had all those first set of kids. That she saw her sister starting to have some, got a little bit jealous, and decided to give her own maid over to Jacob. So that's what we got going on. Genesis 30 and 12. Zilpah, Leah's maid, bore Jacob her second son. 30 and 13. And Leah said, I am happy, for woman will call me blessed, happy, fortunate, to be envied. And she named him Asher, which means happy. Well, it looks like the more the merrier, and it's almost like an addiction to the joys of having children, just to have more, just to relive that emotion of having the kids and the joy of the origin stories of creation, right? We often see situations similar to this nowadays, modern times. We see this where a woman who's not necessarily loved by her husband or boyfriend or whatever conceives a child, and in the conception she's getting all this attention from all those around her family and friends, and the whole world around them gives her all this attention, and then the child is born and she's kind of left to her own devices and everything kind of goes back to normal. But then she goes and has another kid and goes through that whole experience again of everyone showering her with, oh, how courageous or how awesome or how excited they are for the birth of a child. So there's almost like an addiction to that feeling. And she already had her boys, and then she was kind of barren, not having any more. But now through surrogacy, she's able to experience that emotion yet again. And I think the reason why she needs this validation, that she needs this experience, is because Jacob isn't showing her the love and respect that she deserves. He doesn't really, he's there for the making process, but for him to really show love and interest in her as a person, I don't know, I'm not really seeing it, and I can kind of understand, her emotional situation there of just not really being appreciated quite right, despite having all these kids, all these joyous boys that, should just bring joy. But they're not bringing the joy that they should. For Jacob, doesn't seem that interested in her, and that's just kind of a rough situation. Genesis 30:14. Now Reuben went at that time of wheat harvest and found some mandrakes, love apples, in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray you, some of your son's mandrake. 30 and 15. But Leah answered, is it not enough that you have taken my husband without your taking away my son's mandrake also? And Rachel said, Jacob shall sleep with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrake. Well, that is certainly weird and messed up. We have the sexual services of Jacob being transactionally made for some apples, some of these mandrake love apples. Is this the first mention of prostitution in the Old Testament? I don't know. It very well could be. I don't think we saw any others before this. I don't know how old Reuben was at this point in time. I have the feeling he was probably fairly young. So his work, he goes out in the field or whatever, collects these apples, brings them back to his mom, and she trades them. Oh man, that is... I'm sure I've said this before, but the whole polygamy thing is messed up, crazy, and not at all intended by God. He made it for there to be a husband and a wife, not this weird collective bargaining chip thing with trades for apples, and it's really just incredibly disgusting. We have a man's wife trading apples that her son found to get recognized sexually by her husband. That is gotta be one of the most messed up things I have seen. Although we are in the first book of the Bible and there's many more, so we're going to see a lot of crazy stuff as this goes on. Genesis 30:16. And Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him, and said, "You must sleep with me tonight, for I have certainly paid your hire with my son's mandrakes." So he slept with her that night. I don't know if this was an ongoing situation, if this was something that they did multiple times, but it seems like Jacob's familiar with this routine. He knows what the deal is. He's like, "Oh, okay." Genesis 30:17. And God heeded Leah's prayer, and she conceived and bore Jacob her fifth son. 30:18. Leah said, "God has given me my hire, because I have given my maid to my husband." And she called his name Issachar, meaning hired. Genesis 30:19. And Leah became pregnant again and bore Jacob her sixth son. 30:20. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good marriage gift for my husband. Now he dwell with me and regard me as his wife in reality, because I have bore him six sons." And she named him Zebulun, meaning dwelling. Well, there we go. Six sons. That's quite a few. But he's going to need to have all these sons for him to become a great and mighty nation. We need our exponential growth in the number of people for that to happen. Genesis 30:21. Afterwards she bore a daughter and called her Dinah. Genesis 30:22. Then God remembered Rachel and answered her pleading and made it possible for her to have children. Well, this is going to be exciting. All this time, she sees her sister having all these kids. She gets her maid to have some kids. She sees her sister's maid having kids. Everybody's having kids with Jacob. But you know who isn't? Rachel. But if her womb is finally opened up, God has remembered her. She's going to be able to have kids now, and that's very exciting after all these shenanigans. Genesis 30:23. And now for the first time she became pregnant and bore a son. And she said, "God has taken away my reproach, disgrace, and humiliation." Those three things there at the end, reproach, disgrace, and humiliation, those are all terrible, horrendously bad things. So her state of not having kids probably just made her feel awful. But now that time is ended. Genesis 30:24. And she called his name Joseph, meaning may he add, and said, "May the Lord add to me another son." So here we go. This is a big victory, and it's going to lead to a paradigm shift. Genesis 30:25. When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own place and country." So Jacob is talking to Laban, who was his uncle. He originally came to this land for only temporary purposes. He wanted to hide out so his brother didn't kill him. And Isaac, as well as his mother, Rebecca, wanted him to find a spouse as well. So he kind of came down here, and he's accomplished that. That is all done and completed. And now Jacob has this big family. He's gotten married twice, and then he married or had accessory wives in the form of these maids. Maids, both of his wives, so there's 4 of them now. And they have a whole lot of kids, and he's probably worth quite a bit. He's probably made tremendous gains in his personal finances due to his long time of being here and laboring in this area. But now it's time for him to leave. Time for him to return to the old country, to return to the promised land, the land that, in the vision that he received on the way here, to receive the blessings that God had for him. So he's ready to go. He is done. He's completed kind of his task here and is ready to move on. Genesis 30:26. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know the work which I have done for you. So here we go. We have Jacob asking to get what is owed to him for his work, his wives and his kids. Genesis 30:27. And Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I pray you, do not go. For I have learned by experience and from omens and divinations that the Lord has favored me with blessings on your account. So Laban has been able to realize that just having Jacob around has improved his life and his business situation. I guess he's figured this out by divination, so a bunch of weird stuff that they probably did to determine that. It wasn't that he just realized it on his own. He needed to have these divinations, these soothsayers kind of point out, which probably should have been obvious. I mean, if he would have looked at his life before Jacob was there and then to see what his life is like now, he would see the improvements that have been brought since Jacob's arrival. But I guess he had to trust in soothsayers to find that out. He doesn't want him to leave. He wants to stay there so he continues receiving those blessings. But he knows that he can't do that, that Jacob has worked real hard for this. Genesis 30:28, he said, state your salary and I will give it. Laban is not trying to negotiate for a price. He is simply saying, state it and I will give it. In that he's not looking to negotiate, he is just looking to give whatever it is that is asked of him. But Jacob, he doesn't just give him a simple answer. Genesis 30:29, Jacob answered him, you know how I have served you, and how your possessions, your cattle, your sheep and goats have fared with me. 30:30, for you had little before I came, and it has increased and multiplied abundantly. And the Lord has favored you with blessings wherever I turn. But now, when shall I provide for my own house also? Jacob is reiterating all the wonderful things that have happened in the time since he's been there. But he is also in a bit of a dilemma in that he doesn't really know what the exact amount of payment should be or whatever. There's some sort of insecurity there that he doesn't want to just state a price. But at the same time, he also has a big family to look after, and he needs to start his own house, the house of Jacob. Genesis 30:31, Laban said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything, if you will do this one thing for me, of which I am about to tell you, and I will again feed and take care of your flock. Genesis 30:32, let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every spotted and speckled animal, and every black one among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wage. So this is a plan of going through and separating some of the animals that will be for his wage. Quite a system. So he's got to go through, he's going to feed them all, and while he's feeding them, he's going to examine them and take some of them for himself based on their physical characteristics. Genesis 30:33, so later, when the matter of my wages is brought before you, my fair dealing will be evident and answered for me. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the sheep, if it found with me, it shall be counted as stolen. So the animals that didn't pass through that test or whatever will be considered stolen, that they weren't ones that he should have rightly had. Genesis 30:34, and Laban said, good, let it be done as you said. So he's agreeing to this method of his wage. Genesis 30:35, but that same day Laban removed the he-goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted. Everyone had white on it, and every black lamb, and put them in charge of his sons. Okay, so it looks like all that has kind of been dealt with now. Or has it? Genesis 30:36, and he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, and Jacob was then left in care of the rest of Laban's flock. 30:37, but Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and planed trees and peeled with white streaks in them, exposing the white in the rods. Not exactly sure what is going on here, but we'll see in the coming verses. Genesis 30:39. The flocks bred and conceived in sight of the rods, and brought forth lamb and kid streaked and speckled and spotted. Oh, so this is how he's going to do his separating, his filtering process. Genesis 30:40. Jacob separated the lambs as he had done with the peeled rods. He also set the faces of the flocks towards the streaked, and all the dark in the new flocks of Laban. And he put his own droves by themselves, and he did not let them breed with Laban's flock. This sounds like a very elaborate setup, but it's probably much more simple than it sounds for his way of separating them. And he doesn't want his flock to breed with Laban's flock, because then the question becomes, well, whose sheep or whose goat or whatever is bred from that? Who does it belong to? Genesis 30:41. And whenever the stronger animals were breeding, Jacob laid the rod in the watering furrow before the eyes of the flocks, that they might breed and conceive among the rod. Genesis 30:42. But when the sheep and goats were feeble, he omitted putting the rods there, so the feebler animals were Laban, and the stronger were Jacob's. Genesis 30:43. Thus the man increased and became exceedingly rich, and he had many sheep and goats, and maidservants and manservants, camels and donkeys. So this kind of sounds like some sort of selective breeding thing, where he wants the stronger animals to breed so that he gets stronger animals in return. And he didn't do the same thing with the flocks that were of Laban. So he let Laban's kind of do whatever they wanted to, but with his, he tried to get the stronger ones to breed, and as a result, he became exceedingly rich and wealthy. So there we go. That's the strategy. And we still use it today, just in different methods.